Peter was only 10 years old, a lively and curious primary school student who loved two things: playing soccer and reading storybooks. Despite his vibrant personality and endless energy, Peter often found himself alone at home after school. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin, ran a successful shop in the bustling local market, working tirelessly to provide for their family. Every day, the school bus dropped Peter off at home around 3 p.m., and he would remain alone until 6 p.m. when his mother returned from the market. Peter often complained about being bored and lonely. "I'm so bored staying here by myself," he said one evening as his mother prepared dinner. "We're sorry, Peter," his mother explained sympathetically. "It's just for a few hours. We have to work hard to pay for your school fees and other needs." Peter understood but couldn't help wishing that his parents had more time for him. One day, Mrs. Benjamin came up with an idea. "Peter," she said, "how about we ask Auntie Sandra to look after you until we come home?" Auntie Sandra was their cheerful and kind next-door neighbor. In her late 20s, she lived alone and was known for her friendly demeanor. "Okay, Mom," Peter agreed. He knew Auntie Sandra well. She often gave him small treats and seemed genuinely kind. With his approval, arrangements were made, and Peter started staying at Auntie Sandra's house after school. Auntie Sandra's home was small, but immaculately kept. Every day, she greeted Peter with a warm smile and a plate of food. "Peter, come and eat." "How was school today?" she would ask. Initially, Peter felt a bit shy, but her jovial personality and captivating stories made him feel comfortable. As time went on, Auntie Sandra's kindness extended beyond storytelling. She introduced Peter to new cartoons and movies and even bought him a Game Boy, which he loved immensely.
"Peter, take this."
"It's for you," Auntie Sandra said warmly as she handed him the toy. "You're like the little brother I never had." Peter's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you, Auntie Sandra," he said, beaming with joy. However, what began as a heartwarming bond would soon take a disturbing turn, changing Peter's life in ways he couldn't have imagined. One Tuesday afternoon, after school, Auntie Sandra suggested a new activity. "Peter, I have a special game just for us," she said in a hushed tone. "No one else can know about it." Peter didn't understand, but followed her instructions nonetheless. The game quickly became unsettling. Auntie Sandra guided Peter's hand in ways that confused and distressed him. Her expressions and strange sounds only heightened his discomfort. "Auntie, I don't like this game," Peter said, his face marked by confusion and fear. "Don't worry, Peter," Auntie Sandra reassured him. "You'll enjoy it with time." But Peter never did. The so-called game became a daily routine, one that Peter dreaded deeply. Despite his young age, he knew something was terribly wrong. Peter started finding excuses to avoid going to Auntie Sandra's house. He lingered at school long after dismissal and walked home slowly on early closing days. One Friday afternoon, unable to escape, he endured another game session. That evening, he resolved to tell his parents. "Mommy, I want to tell you something," he began hesitantly as his mother cooked dinner. "What is it, Peter?" Mrs. Benjamin asked, her tone impatient. "It's about Auntie Sandra," he started, but she cut him off. "Peter, we work hard to give you the best life we can. Auntie Sandra is helping us. You'll get to like her," she said dismissively. Defeated, Peter returned to his room, tears streaming down his face. That night, he wet the bed for the first time since he was a toddler. Shocked and confused, he wondered if it had anything to do with Auntie Sandra's game. The bedwetting persisted, adding to Peter's growing anxiety. At school, he became withdrawn and distracted. His once bright demeanor faded. During break time, while his friends played soccer, Peter sat alone, lost in thought. Images of Auntie Sandra haunted him. Mrs. Onichi, Peter's attentive class teacher, noticed his change in behavior. One day after class, she asked him to stay behind. "Peter, is everything okay? You seem lost these days," she said gently. "I'm fine, ma'am." Peter lied, his head bowed in shame. "Peter," she continued, "if you're facing any challenges, you can talk to me. I'm here to help." But Peter couldn't find the courage to speak. That evening, Auntie Sandra played her game again. This time, Something unusual happened. Peter's body reacted in ways he didn't understand. Terrified, he decided that he had to confide in someone. The next day, Peter approached Mrs. Onichi after class. "Auntie, I have something to tell you," he said, his voice barely audible. "What is it, Peter?" she asked, leaning in with concern. Peter looked around nervously, ensuring no one was listening. "It's Auntie Sandra. She does things to me and makes me do things I can't explain," he whispered. Mrs. Anikai's expression shifted to shock and determination. "Peter, you've done the right thing by telling me. I promise to help you," she said reassuringly. The school administration took the matter seriously. Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin were summoned to the headmistress's office. "Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin," the headmistress began, "your son has revealed some disturbing incidents involving your neighbor, Auntie Sandra." Mr. Benjamin clenched his fists, anger rising. Mrs. Benjamin was speechless, guilt washing over her. Mrs. Onichi recounted Peter's experience in detail. After much discussion, Mr. Benjamin agreed to involve the authorities. That evening, Auntie Sandra received a knock on her door. 3 stern-faced police officers stood outside. "Miss Sandra, you're under arrest for child molestation," one officer announced. "You must be mistaken," Auntie Sandra stammered, frozen in fear. "It's best you remain silent," the officer said as he handcuffed her. Peter watched from his window, a mix of relief and lingering fear washing over him. From that day forward, Peter's parents made significant changes. They took turns picking him up from school and spending more time with him. At school, Mrs. Onichi kept a close eye on him, encouraging him to speak up whenever he needed help. Though the trauma lingered, Peter began healing with the help of a therapist. The bedwetting gradually stopped, and his vibrant personality slowly returned. He learned an invaluable lesson. Speaking up, even when it's difficult, is the first step toward healing. Peter's story became a reminder to parents, teachers, and children alike to listen, to protect, and to ensure that no child endures such pain in silence.